October 10th marks Pregnant Women's Day here in South Korea, which comes as part of efforts to promote an atmosphere of care and consideration for expecting mothers. On Press Perspective today, we touch upon this particular day and others like it, aimed at advancing overall social well-being. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Friday, October 10th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. For those of you here in Korea, you're tuning in after a long extended holiday that began last Friday to mark National Foundation Day, followed by the Chuseok holiday, and more recently, that is yesterday, Hangul Day. Now, staying with this atmosphere of goodwill, if you will, today we focus on findings that highlight the importance of seeking to strengthen broader social health. For more on this, I have Hanna with the French Sunday paper, La Tribune Dimanche, here in the studio. Hanna, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with the pundit's take on today's topics. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Right, Hanna, let's start with you. Let's begin then with the findings that show a tangible improvement in perceptions about marriage and childbirth among young Korean adults over the past year.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's worth noting that South Korea has long faced the lowest birth rate among the OECD countries, and with just the 0.75% children per woman in 2024. And according to the OECD, this has led to projections that the country's population could halve by 2082 and even fall down one-third in 2100. But however, this critical situation, there may be a glimmer of hope since some Korean studies conducted by Korean institutions showed an improvement in how young people are viewing marriage and having children. For example, one survey conducted in August among about 3,000 people aged from 25 to 49 nationwide, found that about 3/4 of respondents are viewing having children and marriage more positively. And actually, this improved perception is reflected in real life trends. For example, from January to July, there were an increase of 7% in the number of births in South Korea, and as well as for the number of marriage. And the total fertility rate also went up a little bit from 0.72 to 0.75 between 2023 and 2024. But however, the situation remains far from resolved in South Korea because the fertility rate is still one of the more extraordinarily low in the OECD country, and much more will be needed to reverse this long-term trend. And personally, I am not yet convinced that the government's efforts have started to pay off because they have this big objective of fertility rate of 1 by 2030. So what I can say now is nowadays Korean people are more willing to having children and get married with higher income and easier access to parental leave. So I think the government should focus on these efforts to make the situation get better.
Right. And before we focus on the government's efforts, and Colin, what do you believe has been prompting this shift in perception?
This is a question that comes up in many of the articles covering this subject, and it generates a lot of speculation. Nobody knows for sure, of course, but there are a few factors that come up over and over again, or that are cited over and over again. One of them being our distance now from the COVID-19 pandemic, or corona, as it was called here in Korea. It's 2025 now, of course, and it was about 3 years, 2020 through 2023, that for a lot of people around the world, but in Korea as well, life was sort of put on pause. And so whether or not somebody had an intent to get married, start a family before the pandemic, afterward, I think more we're thinking about it, more we're thinking, well, okay, we lost a big chunk of time there. So, what needs to be done now? How do we make up for this lost time? And if you did intend to do that, then it became more of a priority afterwards. So you have that, and you have the corona effect. And then as well, I think there's a bit of an environmental effect that causes. When you see in your social environment, in your friends, in your friend group, or in your family, or in your professional environment, more people or at least a few more people starting to have kids, or at least openly considering it, then for you too, it feels like a more viable proposition. So I think there is that. I mean, this is a country of trends. Let's face it, when a few people start doing something, a lot of them can start doing it suddenly. So I think that is also a power that can be harnessed here in Korea, the sheer force trends have, and the way they can sweep through a city like Seoul. You know, once you get a few people on the bandwagon of having a family, I think it could make it a lot easier. You get the momentum. It's like, you know, if you're pulling a car with your bare hands, the hard part is starting it moving. Once it's moving, you can get it moving pretty easily. But I think that's a big part of it myself.
Right, and despite the shift in perception though, Hanna, a UN report shows that South Korean women are least inclined to have children as compared to their counterparts in, I believe, 8 countries and territories with comparable data. How do you care to explain this reality based on your observations here in the country?
Well, yes, this UN report highlights a striking reality, which is that Korean women show the lowest willingness to have children among these 8 countries, which include like 6 European countries and Hong Kong. And in contrast, Koreans' main intentions are closer to global averages, which is creating the largest gender gap among these 8 countries. But interestingly, this reluctance of Korean women doesn't reflect a lack of belief of the importance of having children. And even more, like in this survey, Korean women consistently rate having children as essential like for a happy life. It's essential for a happy life, and it was higher than in any of the other countries surveyed. So why this contradiction? The studies point out structural and social pressures because Korean women are facing career interruptions, childcare burdens, and limited family supporting policies. So it's making it difficult for them to act on their intentions. For example, in the survey, a young Korean woman interviewed said she deeply values children, but feels that having a child now would be impossible given her job and the lack of support for working mothers. So in this regard, experts emphasize that improving gender equality, expanded child care support, and creating a family-friendly working environment would be essential to help Korean women having the children they want.
Right. And Colin, as Anna mentioned, the Korean government has over the years rolled out quite a number of measures, campaigns to push up its plunging birth rate. Which measure do you suppose stays in your mind?
I remember going to the headquarters of KBS, the national broadcaster, a few months ago and seeing a plaque newly installed right there on the front wall by the entrance, announcing essentially that KBS had been enlisted as an official broadcasting organization against the working against the fall in birth rate, or the anti-low birth rate fighting organization, something like that, if you want to be literal about the translation. And they have put on a campaign that's been going a while now. I think the slogan is "우리 아이, 우리 미래," our children, our future. And most of this campaign involves the imagery or the messaging you would expect. But what does stick in my mind is a collaboration this campaign did with a YouTuber, a child YouTuber known as Taeha, who's one of the most popular child YouTube star in Korea. And there's a channel that's been going on his whole life. I think he's about 4 now, that's followed his sort of daily routine from infancy through toddlerhood and all that. And this campaign brought young Taeha on to discuss the impending birth of his younger sister and how excited he was, how he was anticipating the birth of Dongdongi, was her Taemyong, her pre-birth name. And that was striking, this enlistment of a YouTube star by a state broadcaster to sort of push up the birth rate a bit more. It was more memorable than the rest of the campaign. And I do wonder, well, it made me think, maybe channels like Taeha's channel have done a lot themselves to raise interest, at least, in starting a family among the many viewers that channel has. Although it's a double-edged sword because it can, it shows the joys of childhood and parenthood, but it also, how to put it, it opens a sort of channel to vicariously enjoy those joys without the burdens that can come with them. I say this as a father of newborn twins, but this is much on the internet, right? It shows you, when someone's scrolling through Instagram or whatever, they're seeing all these pictures of, the good life, of vacations, of foods, everything like that, without any of the sort of more difficult qualities that can come with them. They're deriving a certain pleasure, which maybe is making them less willing or less able to deal with the difficulties of bringing those things into their life for real. So it works both ways, I think, but it was a savvy move, I would say, on KBS's part to enlist a social media star. Now, what effect it will have, I think it's going to take a while to find out, but that does stick in my mind.
This is an impromptu question, Colin, but as a father of two adorable toddlers, what support have you been receiving from the government?
There are payments that everybody gets. You get a certain voucher, they say, to start out. You can spend on services and products related to childcare. I guess you could spend them on a variety of different things, but that's been helpful, of course. But I think there's also been just the sort of institutions they have in Korea, like the Choriwon, the Sanhu Choriwon, the sort of like a hotel where they take care of all the tasks and associated duties. They look after the kids when they're at night when they're not sleeping, so you can get a full night's sleep. That's not a government service, but the government does provide payments which you can use for that kind of thing. So I think that's it helps to get this money, but it wasn't necessarily for us what made the difference between having a family or not having a family.
Right, something to think about then. Anna, let's now move on to another issue of interest. Today, October 10th, is also World Mental Health Day. Now, the World Health Organization has sounded the alarm over the mounting global cases of psychological disorders in recent years. Could you start off with these concerns?
Yeah. Well, the World Health Organization is sounding like a serious alarm that over 1 billion people worldwide now live with mental health conditions, from anxiety and depression to even more severe conditions. And these conditions affect individuals as well as family and also economies, because its costs to the global economy about $1 trillion a year, and young people are particularly affected, with suicide remaining a leading cause of death in this age group globally. But even given this critical situation, most countries are still underinvesting. For example, governments spend only 2% of their health budgets on mental health, and there are only just 13 mental health professionals for like 100,000 people globally. And many countries still rely on psychiatric hospitals. However, the organization recognized that there were some positive improvements. For example, mental health is being integrated in primary care, and there are early interventions programs developing in schools, and most countries are including psychological support in emergencies. More importantly, recently the UN has led a high-level meeting on September, and world leaders adopted a declaration calling for urgent action, including better prevention and integration of mental health in primary care. So, in short, the UN and the World Health Organization are sending a clear message. Mental health is a global urgent priority, and coordinated actions are needed to help these people suffering from these disorders.
Right. Colin, here in South Korea, as compared to perhaps 2 decades ago, the stigma surrounding mental health issues appears to be easing. What have been your observations here on the ground?
Yeah, I've been here not 2, but 1 decade myself, so I can speak from that perspective. 10 years ago, I remember I would hear this, the Korean word for crazy, michida. You'd get a lot of warnings not to use it as you would use crazy in English, because in English, crazy is not necessarily very pejorative. You can be like, oh, he's so crazy, oh, you're crazy, everything's crazy. It can have a positive meaning, in fact, or just mean somebody is sort of capricious or whimsical. Whereas here, that is not the meaning of michida, and this is or was taken as a highly offensive term. You could start a fight if you called somebody by this word. So that attitude, that difference in attitude was evident to me. And I would hear this complaint as well, maybe from Korean Americans specifically, that their Korean parents didn't take seriously mental health issues. Their parents would always think you can just snap yourself out of anything if you put your nose to the grindstone. Or they would complain about Korea itself, how there was not really a robust community of or maybe not even that there weren't many, but that it's not a high-profile sector of the economy or sector of the, how to put it, medical world here. People don't instinctively seek treatment, psychological treatment. But you can go too far in that direction. I mean, when I'm in the US or when I'm looking at American corners of the internet, I do notice how the tendency towards psychologization, if we can say that, is very strong, maybe too strong. You go on YouTube and the ads you see are for a lot of ads for remote therapy. You have people staring at the camera and telling you, like, I know you think you don't need therapy, but you do. You know, it's off-putting from at least my perspective, having been out of the US a long time. And as well, when there's violent crime in the US, as there often is, those crimes can involve people who are mentally unwell. There was a high-profile stabbing on a train in North Carolina, in Charlotte, a couple months ago, of a Ukrainian refugee, actually. And it was just a random attack by a man who was clearly, I mean, he has psychological problems. He's been arrested dozens of times. He was under the impression that this young lady was reading his thoughts. So a classic sort of, oh, you know something is wrong mentally. But in the US, oftentimes, a condition like that means you're considered unfit to stand trial. So you're not actually jailed. You're released back into society. Especially in the US, the political left there's the sense that if behavior has if it's rooted psychologically, if it has a probable or plausible psychological cause, it shouldn't be punished or dealt with. So the US has gone too far on that side. Korea, perhaps you could say, it doesn't acknowledge enough yet the importance of mental health, but you can get to the point where you are considering mental health to the exclusion of all else, and nothing ever gets fixed. So there's a road to be traveled between those two extremes, I would say.
Right, and against that backdrop, new government findings show that suicide has overtaken cancer as the top cause of death among South Koreans in their 40s. What has been shared about the causes behind the surging cases of such tragedies here in the country?
Yeah, well, so behind this surge, because this is like the first time since records began in 1883 that suicide has overtaken cancer as the leading cause of death among people in their 40s, experts point to a mix of mental health struggles and economic pressures as key drivers. Because in South Korea, people in their 40s are a critical age group for the workforce. They are facing financial stress, career pressures, and sometimes they also have to deal with children and aging parents. So yeah, this is marking the highest toll in 13 years and pushing the national suicide rate almost 3 times to the OECD average. So this is very concerning for the country, particularly given that at the same time, suicide remains the leading cause of death among teenagers and people in their 20s and 30s, also facing like academic pressure, job insecurity, and social isolation. And the government also shouldn't forget that among South Korean people, there are also elderly people, and some of them are suffering from isolations and sometimes also like quietly letting themselves die in isolation. So this is very concerning.
Right. Colin, President Lee Jae-myung has called contradictory the campaign to raise birth rates in the absence of a campaign to lower suicide rates. What do you believe are perhaps the respective roles of the government and the society itself to prevent suicides and promote, of course, birth rates?
Yes, I've heard him speak about this, and he's right in the sense that these two problems cause the same effect in a way. You have the diminution of the population, but I myself have written about them as two sides of the same coin. Not everybody likes that framing. You know, you can say that the drop of the birth rate is a bit like a sort of national retreat into a kind of state-like death, or you can look at it the other way around as well. But at the same time, I wonder, these problems both have social causes. There are factors embedded in society. One of them, I mean, the act of taking one's own life is often referred to in the Korean media as the 극단적인 선택, the extreme choice, and it tells you that it is considered a choice. Whereas in the U.S., I think there's not that kind of legitimacy to it. We have this slogan often repeated: suicide is never the answer. There are never circumstances, or there are very seldom circumstances under which people understand why somebody would do that. Here, there are more situations where you'll hear people say, "Oh, I can see, well, what other choice did they have? It's not necessarily that it's excused, but in certain high-profile cases where somebody gets in trouble, a politician say, and they're under investigation, well, if they make the extreme choice, often that investigation will end and there will be a presumption of innocence. Whereas in the US, it would be a presumption of guilt. So there are a set of cultural assumptions that are different, and I wouldn't say that Korean culture legitimizes this, but it's a different attitude than there is in the US. And at the same time, with the low birth rate, there are also a set of cultural assumptions, maybe including what standard of living you need to meet in order to even consider starting a family, that also obtains, that also has a strong effect. And I do wonder how much government policy can really move the needle on that, in that how much can the policy change the attitudes? That's a question I have. Certainly government policy, as I mentioned, the money that gets paid out to expecting parents makes it easier, but I think that sort of thing mostly helps when you've already decided you want to have a family, when you're already inclined to start a family. When you're in a position where you don't know if it's even going to be possible, you can't see the road forward, or you can't even see how to put it, how to take the next step in your life, that level of despair. I don't know if the state is well equipped to help. That's more of a situation where your more immediate social surroundings, your more immediate community has, if not failed you, then is in some sense non-existent. I mean, Korea has undergone, this is a cliche to say, but so much technological change, and as a result, so much economic change, that the society looks very little like it did 30, 40, 50 years ago. In many ways, it looks much better than it did at that time. But with that positive change, with that development, comes a certain, as I say, a rise in expectations and a sense that everything is a bit more difficult even to start doing. Even things become more burdensome to even consider when you have all this sort of these extra expectations, this extra weight, the extra sort of everything that goes along with being a highly developed country, which Korea is now. And of course, you see this birth rate problem in not just Korea, where it is extreme, but pretty much every developed country in the world. So Korea has, yes, Korean society has problems, but they're the problems of every developed country, sometimes in extremis, but they're not different in kind, they're different in degree.
Right. Well, here in Korea, given the shift in perception with regard to marriage and childbirth among young South Koreans, perhaps now's the time for the government to take on a proactive approach to the issue. All right, Colin, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you very much.
Anna, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.